gearing up for an assault to retake Iraq's second-largest city from ISIL. A 25,000-strong force is being trained for what the US is calling a pivotal battle. But will Iraqi forces be ready for the fight? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. It's 8 months now since Iraqi forces all but collapsed in the face of marauding ISIL fighters, abandoning their weapons and uniforms as the group conquered Iraq's second-largest city of Mosul. Now, Iraqi and Kurdish forces are preparing for an offensive to take back the city. They're being trained by the US for what the Pentagon is describing as a pivotal battle in the overall campaign in Iraq. Now, Mosul was overrun by ISIL in June. At the time, it was a city of around 1 million people. ISIL has since gained territory that straddles the border between north and western Iraq and eastern Syria as part of its self-declared caliphate. Well, US Central Command says between 20 and 25,000 troops are being assembled for the Mosul campaign to take on between 1,000 and 2,000 ISIL fighters. Now, the main attack force would consist of 5 Iraqi army brigades. 3 smaller brigades would act as a reserve force. 3 brigades of Kurdish Peshmerga troops would contain the city from the north, and a force of former Mosul police officers and tribal fighters is also being assembled. Now, the US will provide training, air support, intelligence and surveillance, but there's been no decision as yet on whether to send in ground troops. Now, we'll be hearing from our correspondent in Baghdad in just a moment, but first, Rosalind Jordan has more from Washington, D.C.
Up to 25,000 Iraqi troops are supposed to launch this so-called spring offensive in order to retake Mosul in April or May. But the big question, are they ready? Since last September, U.S. military advisors have been working with the Iraqi military to try to expand their capacity and to basically make them willing to stay in the fight. The targeting of Mosul, which is currently being controlled by ISIL fighters, could be a very decisive fight. And of course, then the next question would be, would U.S. troops be needed to help the Iraqi military? The U.S. president has long said he doesn't want to send ground troops back into Iraq, but the U.S. military says that they think that if that's the only way that the Iraqi military could succeed, they would make that recommendation. It's still a little too early to tell whether or not this mission could actually succeed, given the critical importance of Mosul to both the Iraqi government and to ISIL fighters.
The key thing here is going to be avoiding civilian casualties. Effectively, ISIL are holding the residents of Mosul prisoner. They built, or rather, they're building a trench around Mosul city. ISIL fighters, we've seen this time and time again in the territories that they've taken over, do use civilian buildings to hide in. This is going to be a street-to-street battle. Airstrikes are only going to take you so far. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, at the very outset of this, has always said we welcome American help, but avoiding civilian casualties has to be a problem. Has to be a priority. So all of this is going to be a very big concern to the Iraqis. They are going to be involved. They're going to be the premier frontline fighting force in all of this. They're going to want to avoid civilian casualties. They're going to need the Americans' help to be able to do that. But all of this is going to be a big victory. If they do manage to take the Mosul city, it's a big victory against ISIL, and perhaps the Iraqis are hoping that the tide will turn against ISIL.
OK, let's bring in our guests. In London, we have Ayman Jawad Al-Tamimi, who's fellow at the Middle East Forum and specialist on ISIL. And in Erbil, we have Ala Maki, Member of Parliament and representative of the Wataniya Alliance in Iraq's Kurdish region. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on Inside Story. Can I start with what is being described as the battle for Iraq itself? The battle to retake Mosul is so important that many people describe it as being a battle for the regaining of Iraqi territory in its entirety. What would you say to that? Can I start with you, please, Ala Maki in Erbil?
As far as we are concerned first of all, as Iraqis living in Erbil, displaced from our places. And we host here about 1 million people from Mosul, from Nineveh as a whole, Muslims, Christians, Yazidi. So this battle, liberating Mosul, is really, yes, I agree with you. It's Iraqi battle. But I just want to comment on the preparation for this battlefield. I think, from my perspective, and we in Wataniya, we announced several times that, ISIS is really very well trained, and they are militias, not formal army. So they need to be combated and be faced by a counter-current force.
So you're suggesting then that the force that is being assembled is actually not ready, is not strong enough. The 20 to 25,000 strong force you think is not ready to take on ISIL?
Yes, really, because the training, from my perspective, there's no training, because they are just, recruited the people, and some of them are military, some civilians, some youth people, and they said, yes, let's go combat, to go to Mosul. The other forces, really, we need very well-trained forces. Therefore, we suggested, as Wataniya, that the previous Iraqi army, which was deferred by Bremer, bad decision, 2003, and those people are very well trained. And mind you, an important point, some of them are now with the counterpart, with Daesh. Some of them are with ISIS fighting.
Right. I understand the point you're making, but clearly in talking up this campaign, in being very confident that this campaign can take place, we understand in the spring, before the very hot summer of Iraq, that Haider al-Abadi is exceedingly confident that he has enough training now for his troops. The Americans have beefed up their training, as have many other Western countries. Haider al-Abadi is confident that he has a force that can take on ISIL and win back Mosul.
With all respect to Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, this is a military issue, and it needs military experts to talk. So far, the Iraqi army, the current Iraqi army military leaders has failed in combating Daesh yet. And everybody in Iraq and worldwide knows that Iraqi army is not suitable currently, in spite of all the trainings, but there is some, some killing mistakes inside the organization of the Iraqi army.
All right, okay. Can I ask you to hold that thought, because that's very interesting indeed. But in the meantime, I do have to bring in our other guest, Ismael Al-Tamimi, because you're an expert on ISIL and the way ISIL actually operates. I mean, on the face of it, we're talking about a force of between 20 and 25,000 reasonably trained, at least, soldiers, up against, 2,000 ISIL fighters. Now, on the face of it, it's no contest. They should be able to go in and retake Mosul with minimum amount of civilian casualties.
I don't think so. I think with regards to the figure of 2,000, the figure being put out of only 2,000 ISIL fighters in Mosul, I think we need to be a bit skeptical of that. Certainly, actually, what has happened since the summer when Mosul fell out of government control, ISIL will have certainly bolstered their numbers in Mosul, first in two ways. Firstly, by recruiting from locals who weren't with any armed group necessarily, and ISIL in Nineveh province and their Nineveh province media feed, they put this new emphasis on recruiting a new generation.
But this would be forcible conscription, presumably, would it? Would that be forcible conscription?
Sure. But I was going I was also going to mention the issue of being bolstered also by pledges of allegiance from other insurgents in the Mosul area over the summer. I mean, when Mosul first fell out of government control, it wasn't just ISIL involved, but ISIL very quickly gained the upper hand over its rivals and certainly bolstered its numbers through pledges of allegiance. And Mosul, secondly, is for ISIL the crown jewel of its Iraq conquests, in the same way that Raqqa in Syria has been the crown jewel of its Syrian conquests. And they will certainly fight to the very end to defend it. And there are many tactics that ISIL can use that will disrupt, that will pose potential problems, even if they're faced by a force that outnumbers them. And we've seen it in other areas of Iraq too, for example in Beji, further south near Tikrit. Namely, ISIL's use of booby traps in buildings and on streets pose huge problems for an Iraqi army that has proven itself unable to take any major city that has fallen out of government control since the fall of Fallujah in January 2014. I mean, when Fallujah fell out of government control in January of 2014, people expected, well, maybe the army could take it within a couple of weeks or within a month, but we're over a year now, and there's been no sign of any meaningful government incursion into the urban area of Fallujah. And so even with a timescale of training, I believe, that's too rapid and too fast, and in my view, the Iraqi force would have to be bolstered by US ground troops. I don't see a positive outcome coming from this planned offensive.
Coming back to you, Ala Maki in Erbil, I mean, you've mentioned, touched upon the critical issue of the position of the Sunni tribes, of the Sunni militias in and around the area. And of course, Haider al-Abadi's government, the raison d'etre in so many ways, was to unify Iraq, was to reach out to the disaffected Sunni community and bring them on board on this national project, the National Guard that he's trying to create to bring Iraq back together. Would you say that he's succeeded in doing that so far? You mentioned or alluded to the fact that perhaps many former Baathists have not been incorporated in the new national project.
Well, let's go back a few months ago when Haider al-Abadi was nominated. He promised several promises. No one of these promises had been done. One of them is the reconciliation and the opening on the people who are not participating in the political project. And now we notice that there is supervening of the militia supported from the eastern neighbor of Iraq. And there is no security even in Baghdad, which is the capital, and we suppose we have the most stable area. How far we go to Mosul to talk about well-trained forces? I think this is nonsense. There is no well-trained forces. This is just political issues, and the people, they want to say in front of the international community that we can't do something.
Okay, now I'm happy to say that from Washington, D.C., we can speak to Ismael Alsodani, who's a retired Iraqi Brigadier General. Thank you very much indeed for joining us in this conversation. And as a military man, I'd be particularly keen to hear your thoughts on this force that's been assembled by the government in Baghdad to try to retake Mosul, we understand, within the coming weeks, before the summer. What do you make of the force?
Well, I think the battle for Mosul is inevitable for the Iraqi government, for the Iraqi military. Therefore, retaking all the territories that are controlled by ISIS since summer 2014 is a very important task for the Iraqi forces.
In Mosul in particular?
That has been,
sorry, with Mosul in particular?
Mosul in particular, yes. I think that 25,000 personnel that Iraqi government is preparing to retake Mosul from ISIL, it would be sufficient. The training they have taken already in the Iraqi base is already sufficient. The question is whether the Iraqi forces will be having a strong reserve that can intervene in time to in a short note to any unexpected situation that may take place in the battle.
So, General Alsodani, what do you make then of the overall military strategy of the plan to retake Mosul?
Well, this is a battle that has no choices for the Iraqi commanders, either to win or to win, because the consequences of failing to take Mosul from ISIL will be grave consequences on the future of Iraq, the unity of the country as well. Therefore, I believe that the commanders should take all the consideration in their mind while they are planning for this battle. I would like to say also that the commanders should be realistic and logical to evaluate their capabilities to take Mosul from ISIL. Their capabilities, the circumstances that are around them and surrounding them. Therefore, I believe, in my perspective, my personal perspective, that Iraqi forces need foreign forces to take part in this battle, not necessarily to be in lead, but maybe to be reserved in a very near area that can be intervened in any unexpected situation, as I said earlier. But again, that has been said, that the domestic, regional, international environment is really assisting, is really supporting the Iraqi government efforts to defeat ISIL in Mosul. So therefore, I believe that the circumstances, the environment is very suitable for the Iraqi government to retake Mosul in the spring. But we have to take all the consideration in our mind in order not to have another setback, which is not acceptable by any means.
Ayman, in London, as a specialist on ISIL and its tactics, is there anything that the Iraqi government and its forces can learn from the battle for Kobani, which eventually ISIL lost, of course, but that involved local forces on the ground and air support from the US-led coalition? What does that tell us about how ISIL will put up a fight for Mosul, perhaps?
With regards to the Kobani fight, it's different in that ISIL there was on the offensive. It was trying to prove that in the face of hundreds of airstrikes, it could still take territory. And of course, in that enterprise, as you noted, ultimately failed. And I think, referring to my earlier point about Mosul's significance for ISIL as the main jewel in its conquest, they will certainly put in all efforts possible to defend the city, and in that regard, this partly explains why a key part of current strategy has been to try to cut off supply lines coming in from Syria, lest ISIL try to call in reinforcements from across the border to help defend the city. But also from the Kobani experience, there is also these reports of unexploded munitions and explosives that still have to be cleared if the Kobani area is going to be settled by civilian population. And also mentioned about the experience in Beji for fighting between ISIL and the Iraqi government forces. A similar problem could arise in Mosul. And then the question would be of how much infrastructure would remain if ISIL ultimately got expelled from the city.
And General Alsodani, coming back to you in Washington, D.C., I'm rather interested in the fact that we've got this leak of information about what is a very important, perhaps even a critical campaign being undertaken by the Iraqi armed forces. Why do you think this level of detail has been allowed to leak out? I mean, it's coming from Pentagon senior military officials within the Pentagon.
Well, there are many critics about this kind of announcement from the Pentagon sources. Well, in my understanding, this is a good message should be sent to ISIL that Iraq wouldn't abandon their territories and the H hour for this battle is due, and the Iraqi army will never give you a chance to capture the ground for longer time. Again, maybe we wouldn't achieve the surprise by timing, but there are lots of means that we can achieve the surprise on, like the style, the maneuver, many things that the military can achieve the surprise, not necessarily by timing.
Okay, Ala Maki, in Erbil now, do you get a sense that the Iraqi people are expectant, are apprehensive, are optimistic that Mosul can be indeed taken back by a newly formed Iraqi force?
Well, I just want to revert you and my colleagues and the audience in Al Jazeera channel to an announcement of Pentagon representative a week or 2 weeks ago. He said, we have been for 7 months fighting ISIL, and we liberate 700 square kilometer of 55,000 square kilometer. So that means failure in fighting ISIS so far. So I agree with my colleagues. Both of them said there's no real consideration for the battle volume, battle size, battle, expectations. So to me, this preparation are failure. We should cooperate with all the previous fighters, and we try also to attack ISIL inside its battle.
Can I take that point that you made and put it to General Alsodani? Mr. Maki suggesting that in forming this National Guard, the government in Baghdad has not done enough to embrace those Sunni members of the former members of the Ba'ath Party who perhaps could be very useful indeed. They're the ones who formed the professional army, of course, before the US-led invasion.
Well, it's premature to talk about the National Guard's formations, because that is a legislation, needs to be passed by the parliament, needs to be having resources, recruiting, equipping them, train them. That would be consuming a lot of time. What I would suggest that the National Guard's formation should be reconsidered, or should be considered after the battle, after the liberation of Mosul. And that time, the National Guard will be in charge and responsible to capture the ground and control on all the security and ensure that the security is available in Mosul. So that's I think this is my suggestion, and I think the government is also going to adopt this suggestion or this strategy.
And Ayman, coming to you, we started off by talking about Mosul as being a pivotal battle for the Iraqi institutions, not just the armed forces, actually, for Iraq as a whole. But you're suggesting that this is equally important for ISIL to defend the gains that they've made in Mosul.
Yes, definitely, because you can see, particularly by comparison between Raqqa in Syria and Mosul in Iraq, from the various administrative documents put out by ISIL that I've been able to obtain and made an archive of many of them, that the development of ISIL governance there is it's almost identical in terms of regulations to the education system, outlawing of art and music, for example, establishment of a so-called health department, for example, in Mosul, to put regulations on price controls on pharmaceutical goods, even the claimed opening of a factory for synthetic body parts in Nainawa province. So you see how important this area is to ISIL, and they will certainly put in all efforts to defending it from any government offensive. Gentlemen,
thank you all very much indeed. Another very interesting conversation here on Inside Story. Thank you very much. Thank you to Ayman Jawad Al-Tamimi, and in Washington, Ismael Alsodani, and in Erbil, of course, Ala Maki. Thank you all very much indeed. And thank you, of course, as ever, for joining us. If you've got any comments, if you've got any questions, if you'd like to continue the conversation, remember you can always go to our programme page at aljazeera.com. You can post your comments also at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or, of course, there's always the Twitter sphere at AJ Inside Story. I'm Martine Dennis from the whole team. Bye for now.